Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're tackling a massive question. Why do so many well-intentioned, highly funded interventions just fail to actually change the world? We're going to unpack some brilliant insights from Abdifatah Osman Hussein's work on sovereign leadership, and together we'll discover how to completely shift our focus from slapping on temporary fixes to actually building enduring institutions. So, if you've ever felt frustrated watching the exact same systemic problems repeat year after year, you are in exactly the right place. Let's get into it.
It all starts with this incredibly unsettling question posed by Hussein right at the beginning of his work. When the project ends, what actually remains? Think about it. It perfectly exposes the frustrating reality of the modern development paradox. We pour billions into aid, development, massive corporate restructuring. We hit every single metric. The quarterly reports are glowing. And yet, 5, maybe 10 years later, the exact same vulnerabilities are still there. The project succeeded on paper, but the system itself? It didn't change a bit.
Which brings us to the development illusion, motion versus progress.
Look, there is a huge difference between visible activity and invisible outcomes. Visible activity is super easy to slap onto a report, right? It's funding dispersed, it's new buildings erected, it's endless synergy workshops. But you have to look at the roots, the invisible outcomes. Things like institutional trust, local governance, a truly adaptive culture. Those are incredibly hard to measure. But here's the catch. If you don't build those invisible foundations, that shiny new structure you just spent millions funding will inevitably collapse the second the money dries up.
And that leads us to the linear thinking trap in complex ecosystems. So why do we keep making the same mistake? Well, it's mostly because human societies just don't behave like simple machines. Linear thinking says, oh, unemployment is high, let's just train more people. Boom, problem solved, right? But systems thinking asks us to step back and look at the whole living ecosystem. Because if there's no infrastructure, no real market demand, and a fragile regulatory environment, simply training a bunch of people won't solve a thing. In a complex ecosystem, your simple linear solution might actually just spawn a brand new unintended problem.
Next up is the heroic leadership myth.
You know, we're practically conditioned by movies and history books to wait for a hero to swoop in and save the day. The visionary founder, the transformational president, the lone genius innovator. But here is the reality check. While heroic leaders are incredibly visible and inspiring, their impact is almost always temporary because they naturally centralize power. When they eventually leave, all that momentum just evaporates. Enduring institutions, on the other hand, distribute capability. True, lasting progress relies on systems that consistently enable ordinary, everyday people to achieve extraordinary things, completely independent of a superhero.
From charity to capability, building autonomy.
Now, let me be absolutely clear here. Emergency relief is crucial. When an earthquake hits, you don't stop and try to reform the local government. You save lives, obviously. But if you stop there, you accidentally create this revolving door of permanent dependency. The ultimate goal has to be what Hussein calls sovereignty. Sovereignty is all about creating autonomy. It means giving the system the actual capability to stand on its own 2 feet, so that the next time a shock hits, they don't have to wait around for outside help just to survive.
Hussein actually maps this out using a really concrete ladder of development. Step 1 is relief, just surviving the immediate crisis. Step 2 is recovery, where we start rebuilding basic stability and, frankly, hope. Step 3 is capacity, where individuals and teams finally acquire new skills. But step 4? That is the absolute holy grail, institutional sovereignty. This is where learning is literally embedded into the organization's DNA. It's when a community can adapt, innovate, and independently solve the next problem completely without you.
We really need to redefine that word, sovereignty, because it carries a lot of baggage. In this context, it absolutely does not mean isolation. It doesn't mean rejecting global partnerships or stubbornly doing everything alone. It means institutional maturity. It means possessing the robust, independent capability to manage your own future. Think of it this way. When a truly sovereign institution partners with an external organization, it does so out of confident collaboration, not out of desperate necessity.
So, to actually climb that ladder, leaders have to make a profound mental shift. You have to move from being a manager to being a steward. Now, managers are incredibly useful. They optimize today's efficiency, they put out the daily fires, we need them. But stewards are playing a much longer game. A steward designs tomorrow's architecture. They focus heavily on institutional capability, and they are constantly asking themselves, will this organization be stronger and more capable long after I hand over the keys?
Let's look at history's lessons, invisible architecture. And history backs this up entirely. Think about Rome. We always picture their visible empire expansion, but their true, invisible architecture was their legal system and their incredibly resilient bureaucracy that outlived the emperors themselves. In the 19th century, Meiji Japan rapidly industrialized, but their secret sauce was systematically adapting educational and civil institutions to make that learning self-sustaining. And what about Singapore? With practically zero natural resources, they built an absolute economic powerhouse entirely on the invisible architecture of strict meritocracy and continuous institutional learning.
Now, building this kind of deep, invisible architecture doesn't happen overnight. It takes serious time. But there's this powerful African proverb that hits the nail on the head. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. The painstaking, often unglamorous work of building deep institutional roots has to begin immediately. As a steward, you just have to be willing to plant the seeds for a system that will provide shade long after you've moved on.
Which brings us to the ultimate test, your leadership legacy.
Let's bring this right down to your own sphere of influence. Imagine two hospitals. Both are fully funded, both are staffed with equally brilliant, top-tier doctors, but their patient outcomes are completely different. Why is that? Well, because one hospital has a culture that punishes mistakes, which just drives errors underground through fear. The other has an architecture designed to safely learn from mistakes, improving continuously. The difference there isn't the talent of the individuals. It is the invisible, underlying system that dictates their success.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final, provocative question. When your tenure ends, when that funding cycle inevitably closes, when you finally retire, what kind of institution will exist because you were here? Will the whole thing collapse the moment you walk out the door? Or are you actively designing an invisible architecture that will adapt, learn, and endure for generations to come? Thank you so much for exploring the profound truths of sovereign leadership with us today. Now, I challenge you to go out and start building that enduring architecture right now.